The first time I realized silence could hurt more than angry words, I was standing barefoot on a cold wooden floor with a cracked bowl lying at my feet. No one had shouted. No one had raised a hand. No one had even looked angry. And yet I wished I could disappear. For years, I told myself that moment didn't matter. It was only a bowl. Only one quiet evening. Only one mistake. But memories have a strange way of proving us wrong. Some moments stay with us long after the broken pieces have been swept away. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand why that cracked bowl became the beginning of a truth I spent decades trying to understand. My name is Martha. This is a fictional story inspired by Amish life and traditions. The people, events, and conversations are imagined, but the emotions belong to anyone who has ever tried so hard to be enough that they forgot how to be themselves. The morning after my wedding began before the sun. I woke to the sound of horses moving in the barn and the slow creak of the windmill turning behind the house. For a few seconds, I forgot I was married. Then I opened my eyes and saw a room that didn't belong to my childhood. The quilt on the bed wasn't one my mother had sewn. The curtains weren't the ones I remembered from home. Even the light coming through the window felt different. I lay perfectly still, listening. Somewhere downstairs, someone was already moving. My husband, Daniel. He had always been an early riser. Everyone in the district said he was dependable, hardworking, quiet, the kind of man who never left a job unfinished. Those were good qualities. Still, I barely knew him. Our families had known each other for years, but knowing a family isn't the same as knowing the person you'll share every ordinary day with. I dressed quickly, tied my apron, covered my hair, and hurried downstairs. Daniel was already carrying fresh wood inside. He smiled politely. "Good morning." "Good morning." His voice was gentle, but I still felt nervous. Everything I did suddenly seemed important. How I folded towels, how I stirred oatmeal, how I placed plates on the table. I wasn't simply making breakfast. I was quietly asking a question without speaking it. Am I doing this right? Daniel thanked me for the meal before walking outside to begin the morning chores. I noticed he rinsed his own bowl before leaving it beside the sink. It surprised me. My father had never done that. Little things become very noticeable when you've entered a new life. The days settled into a rhythm. Before daylight, I lit the stove. After breakfast, I baked bread, washed clothes, carried water, swept floors, gathered eggs, peeled vegetables, and learned where everything belonged inside the farmhouse. Every evening I fell asleep almost as soon as my head touched the pillow. I wanted so badly to become the wife everyone believed I already was. Not because anyone demanded perfection, because I demanded it from myself. 3 days after the wedding, Daniel's older sister Ruth came to visit. She brought homemade jam and fresh butter wrapped in cloth. She hugged me warmly before looking around the kitchen. "You've made the place feel welcoming already." I smiled politely. "I've been trying." She laughed softly. "We all try." While Daniel repaired a wagon wheel outside, Ruth helped me prepare supper. She worked calmly, never rushing, never worrying. At one point I apologized because the potatoes were taking longer to cook than I expected. She looked at me with gentle surprise. "What are you apologizing for?" "I should have planned better." She shook her head. "Martha," she smiled kindly, "a meal doesn't have to be perfect to feed people." I laughed politely, but inside I wasn't convinced. After supper, Ruth hugged us goodbye and climbed into her buggy. The farmhouse became quiet once again. I gathered the dishes and carried them toward the wash basin. That was when it happened. One wet bowl slipped from my hands. It struck the edge of the table, then the floor. The sharp sound echoed through the kitchen. The bowl split neatly into 2 pieces. I froze. My breathing became shallow. My hands began shaking before I even looked toward Daniel. He had been reading quietly near the lantern. Now he simply looked up. Neither of us spoke. I stared at the broken bowl. All I could think was that I had failed. The bowl itself didn't matter. It could be replaced. What frightened me was the feeling inside my chest. The fear of disappointing someone. The fear of being seen as careless. The fear of no longer being enough. Daniel quietly stood and walked toward me. He looked at the broken pieces. Then he looked at me. Martha. His voice was calm. Are you hurt? The question confused me. I blinked. What? Did the bowl cut your hand? I looked down. I hadn't even noticed. A small line of blood ran across one finger. Daniel gently handed me a clean towel. Sit down. I'm sorry. He frowned slightly. For what? I broke it. He glanced at the bowl. It was an accident. I lowered my eyes. I should have been more careful. Instead of answering, he picked up the broken pieces and placed them on the table. Then he quietly swept the floor before I could stop him. Watching him do that somehow made my tears harder to hold back, because I had expected disappointment, not kindness, not help, not concern. I couldn't understand why such a small act made me feel so overwhelmed. Maybe because no one had ever asked if I was hurt before asking what had happened. About 3 minutes into the story, I'd like to ask you something. If you've ever carried the quiet pressure of trying to be good enough for everyone around you, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read your comments because so many of these stories remind us that none of us carries life's burdens alone. That night, after the lanterns had been blown out, sleep refused to come. Daniel was already asleep beside me. Outside, rain tapped softly against the roof. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, not because of the broken bowl, because of one question. Are you hurt? No one had asked me that after a mistake before. The next morning, while making the bed, I noticed something tucked carefully beneath Daniel's pillow. It wasn't there the night before. Curious, I reached for it. It was an old folded letter. Across the front, written in faded ink, were only 5 words. Open only after you're married. I had no idea who had written it. But before the week ended, Daniel would tell me exactly where it came from, and the words inside would completely change the way I understood silence, marriage, and the burdens people carry without ever speaking them aloud. I looked at the folded letter for only a few seconds before placing it exactly where I had found it. Something inside me wanted to open it. Something else told me it wasn't mine. I closed the bedroom door behind me and went downstairs, but the image of those 5 words stayed with me all morning. Open only after you're married. Who had written it? Why had Daniel kept it hidden beneath his pillow instead of inside a drawer? And why had he waited until now to bring it out? The questions followed me through every chore. I measured flour into the bread bowl, fed the chickens, hung damp clothes on the line behind the house, carried fresh water from the pump. Every task felt familiar enough to keep my hands busy, but not busy enough to quiet my thoughts. By the time Daniel returned from the fields for the midday meal, I had almost convinced myself to forget about the letter. Almost. He washed his hands at the basin before sitting down. The room smelled of vegetable soup and fresh bread. Outside, a light breeze stirred the maple trees. For several minutes, we ate in comfortable silence. Then Daniel looked at me. You've been quiet today. I smiled. I suppose I have. Is something troubling you? I hesitated. I found a letter. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he slowly set down his spoon. I wondered if you might. I wasn't looking for it. I know. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked, who wrote it? My mother. I blinked. Your mother? He nodded. She gave it to me the morning before our wedding. And told you not to read it until afterward? Exactly. I couldn't hide my curiosity. Did you read it? Last night. I looked at him with surprise. So that's why it wasn't there before. He smiled faintly. I slipped it under my pillow after I finished. I wanted to ask what it said. Instead, I waited. After a few quiet moments, Daniel reached into his shirt pocket. The letter was neatly folded. He placed it on the table between us. You can read it if you'd like. I don't know if I should. I think she'd want you to. I unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting was graceful, steady, and unmistakably written by someone who had taken her time. The letter began simply. My dear son, tomorrow you will become a husband. Many people will tell you how to provide for your family. Some will teach you how to work hard. Others will remind you to protect your home. All of that matters. But I pray someone also teaches you how to notice the heart of the woman God has entrusted to your care." I paused. The words felt deeply personal. I continued reading. "There will be days when she smiles even though she is tired. There will be days when she says she is fine because she believes that is what a good wife should say." Do not always believe the words. Learn to notice the quiet things. A slower step. A trembling hand. Eyes that look away too quickly. Kindness begins with paying attention. By the time I reached the end, my eyes were filled with tears. The final sentence was the shortest of all. "Take care of her heart as faithfully as you care for your fields." I folded the letter slowly and handed it back. "Your mother was a wise woman." Daniel smiled. "She usually knew exactly what I needed to hear." I think she knew what I needed to hear too. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Learn to notice the quiet things. I realized I had spent years doing the opposite. I noticed every mistake I made, every chore that wasn't finished quickly enough, every loaf that wasn't baked perfectly, but I rarely noticed kindness. I rarely allowed myself to receive it. That evening, we walked together through the orchard after supper. The air carried the scent of apples that had fallen into the grass. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the fields, covering everything in warm golden light. Daniel walked slowly, his hands folded behind his back. "I've wanted to ask you something." I looked toward him. "What is it? Were you frightened after the wedding?" I laughed softly. "I still am." He nodded as though he had expected that answer. "So was I." I stopped walking. "You were?" "Of course." I couldn't help smiling. "I thought husbands didn't admit things like that." "We usually don't." "What frightened you?" He looked across the fields before answering. "I kept wondering whether I would be the kind of husband my father had been." "Was he a good man?" "He was." Daniel smiled gently. "But every son worries he'll fall short." His honesty surprised me. Until then, I had imagined I was the only one carrying quiet fears into our marriage. Now I realized we had both entered this new life hoping not to disappoint the other. We simply hid it in different ways. When we reached the farmhouse again, the lantern in the kitchen had already been lit. Its soft glow spilled across the porch. Daniel opened the door for me. As I stepped inside, my eyes fell on the corner cupboard. There, resting on the top shelf, was another bowl, almost identical to the one I had broken. Daniel noticed me looking. "My mother gave us that one too." I smiled. "I'll try not to drop it." He laughed quietly. "If you do," he paused, "we'll still have each other." For reasons I couldn't explain, those words stayed with me long after we had gone to bed. I believed I was beginning to understand my husband, but I wasn't, not completely. Because 2 mornings later, while helping clean the old workshop behind the barn, I would discover a small wooden box that had not been opened in years. Inside, it was something Daniel had hidden from everyone, not because he was ashamed, but because he had never found the right moment to speak about it. And when he finally trusted me with that part of his past, I understood that every quiet person carries a story no one else can see. 2 mornings later, the sky was clear for the first time in nearly a week. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the fields washed clean. Every blade of grass shimmered beneath the early sunlight, and the air carried that fresh scent that always comes after several days of steady rain. Daniel had decided it was time to clean the old workshop behind the barn. It had belonged to his father before he passed away, and although Daniel kept the building in good repair, there were shelves and boxes that hadn't been touched in years. "I could use another pair of hands," he said after breakfast. "I'll help." The workshop was smaller than the barn, but much older. Sunlight slipped through narrow windows, filling the room with soft beams that danced through the dust whenever we moved something. Old tools lined one wall. Wooden shelves held jars filled with nails, screws, and carefully labeled hardware. Everything had its place. Daniel smiled as he looked around. "My father believed a clean workshop made for a clear mind." "It looks like he succeeded." He laughed quietly. "He tried." For the next hour, we worked side by side without saying very much. That was becoming one of my favorite things about being with Daniel. The silence between us never felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. At one point, he climbed a ladder to remove several heavy boxes from the highest shelf while I swept the floor below. When he handed down the last box, something small slid off the back and landed with a soft thud behind an old cabinet. "I'll get it," I said. I knelt and reached into the narrow space. My fingers touched smooth wood. It was a small wooden box, no larger than both of my hands together. A thin layer of dust covered the lid. There was something behind the cabinet. Daniel climbed down from the ladder. The moment he saw the box, the smile disappeared from his face. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. "You've seen it before." He nodded slowly. "I forgot it was here." He picked it up carefully and brushed away the dust with his sleeve. The box wasn't locked. There wasn't even a latch. Just a simple wooden lid worn smooth with age. I looked at him. "You don't have to show me if it's private." He remained quiet. Then he looked into my eyes. "No. I think it's time." He carried the box outside, where the morning light was brighter. We sat together on an old wooden bench beneath the maple tree beside the workshop. For a long moment, Daniel rested the box on his lap without opening it. It belonged to my younger brother. I frowned. "You had a brother?" "I still do." His answer surprised me. "I've never heard anyone mention him." "Very few people do." He slowly lifted the lid. Inside were only a handful of things. A pocket knife, a small leather strap, a worn Bible bookmark, and a smooth skipping stone. None of them looked valuable. Yet Daniel handled each one with extraordinary care. My brother Eli was 6 years younger than I was. His voice had changed. It had become quieter. He could never sit still. He climbed every tree. He talked to everyone. He laughed louder than anyone I knew. A small smile appeared on Daniel's face. He used to say life was too short to hurry. I smiled. I think I would have liked him. "You would have?" Daniel picked up the smooth stone. "We used to skip rocks across Miller's Pond every Sunday afternoon after chores." He turned the stone slowly in his fingers. "He always beat me." "You never won?" "Not once." We both laughed. It was the first time I had heard Daniel tell childhood stories. Then his smile slowly faded. When Eli was 19, he stopped. I waited. He decided to leave. The words hung quietly between us. He wanted to see more of the world. He believed he needed time away before deciding what kind of life he truly wanted. I remained silent. He wasn't angry. He didn't leave because he hated anyone. He simply felt restless. Daniel looked toward the fields. My parents cried after he left. My mother prayed for him every single day. "Did he ever come back?" Daniel nodded once. "Only once." My heart tightened. "When?" 3 years later." "What happened?" "He stayed for 2 days. He apologized for leaving without saying goodbye properly. He hugged our parents. He promised he would visit again before Christmas." Daniel swallowed, but he never did. The breeze moved gently through the maple leaves above us. I could hear horses shifting quietly inside the nearby barn. "What happened to him?" Daniel looked down at the box. "There was an accident. He was traveling home during winter. The roads were covered with ice. He never made it." Neither of us spoke. The morning suddenly felt much quieter. "I've never told anyone that story except you." "Not even Ruth?" He shook his head. "My sister lived through it. She doesn't like talking about it either." I understood now why that little wooden box had been hidden away. It wasn't hiding memories. It was protecting them. Daniel closed the lid gently. "For a long time," he said quietly, "I believed that if I stopped talking about Eli, it would hurt less." "Did it?" He smiled sadly. "No. It only made me lonelier." His words settled deep inside my heart. How many people carried grief that way? Not because they wanted to keep secrets, because they didn't know how to begin the conversation. I reached over and rested my hand gently on his. "You don't have to carry it by yourself anymore." Daniel looked at me for several long seconds, his eyes filled with emotion, but he didn't look away. "Thank you." That afternoon, we placed the wooden box inside a cabinet in our bedroom instead of returning it to the workshop. It wasn't hidden anymore. It simply had a new place. As evening settled over the farm, we sat together on the porch, watching the last light disappear beyond the fields. For the first time since our wedding, I realized something important. Marriage wasn't only about sharing work, or meals, or responsibilities. It was about slowly trusting another person with the parts of your life that had remained locked away for years. I thought we had shared our deepest stories. I was wrong. Because the very next evening, someone unexpected would arrive at our farmhouse. The knock on our front door would bring news that neither of us had been prepared to hear. And before that night was over, Daniel would discover that the past he believed had ended years ago had never truly been left behind. The following evening was unusually quiet. The wind had settled, and even the horses seemed calmer than usual. After supper, Daniel carried another armful of firewood into the house while I wiped the kitchen table and hung the dish towels beside the stove to dry. The lantern on the table gave the room a soft, golden glow. It was the kind of evening people often remember as ordinary. At least that is how it began. Daniel sat near the window with his Bible resting on his lap. I was mending one of his work shirts when someone knocked on the front door. Not once. 3 slow, careful knocks. We looked at each other. Visitors after dark were uncommon unless something important had happened. Daniel stood first. "I'll see who it is." When he opened the door, I heard a familiar voice. "Good evening, Daniel." It was Mr. Miller, an older neighbor who lived nearly 2 miles away. His buggy was still waiting outside, and I could see his horse breathing small clouds into the cool night air. Daniel invited him inside. "You've come a long way. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." Mr. Miller removed his hat and accepted the chair nearest the stove. For a few moments, no one spoke. He seemed to be searching for the right words. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. "I've been keeping this for several years." Daniel looked confused. "What is it?" "It belongs to your family." Daniel slowly picked it up. "My family?" Mr. Miller nodded. "I promised someone I would deliver it if the time ever felt right." The room became very still. Daniel turned the envelope over in his hands. There was no name written on the outside, only a familiar piece of handwriting. His face changed immediately. He looked at Mr. Miller. "This is Eli's writing." Mr. Miller lowered his eyes. "Yes." Daniel sat down without saying another word. His hands trembled as he carefully unfolded the paper. I had never seen him look so uncertain. He began reading silently. Halfway through the letter, he stopped. He closed his eyes. For several long moments, the only sound in the room was the quiet crackling of the fire. I didn't interrupt him. Neither did Mr. Miller. Finally, Daniel looked up. "When did he write this?" "The week before the accident." Mr. Miller answered gently. "He stopped by my farm on his way north. He asked me to hold on to it. He said he wasn't ready to send it yet." Daniel looked back at the letter. "He wanted to come home." Mr. Miller nodded. "He told me he had spent years searching for something he couldn't even describe. And then one morning he realized," Mr. Miller smiled sadly, "that what he missed most had never been a place. It was the people who loved him." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He returned to the letter. This time he read part of it aloud. "If you're reading this..." He paused to steady his voice. "Then I finally found enough courage to tell you that leaving home wasn't the answer to every question I carried." He stopped again. I quietly reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently before continuing. "I've learned that the people who truly love us are worth returning to, even if we think we've disappointed them." Daniel could read no further. He folded the letter carefully. For years, he had believed his younger brother had died without saying goodbye. Now he knew that wasn't true. Eli had been trying to come home. He had simply run out of time. Mr. Miller looked toward Daniel. "I've wondered many times whether I should have delivered that letter sooner." Daniel shook his head. "You honored the promise you made." "I don't blame you." The older man sighed with relief. "I've prayed for that forgiveness for many years." After he left, Daniel remained seated at the table. The letter rested beside the lantern. Neither of us hurried to speak. Some moments deserve silence. Finally, Daniel looked at me. I spent years believing my last memory of Eli would always be our goodbye. He smiled through tears. Now my last memory is his decision to come home. I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders, not because the sadness was gone, because the unanswered question was finally answered. A few days later, we walked together to the small cemetery where Daniel's parents and Eli were buried. The autumn leaves covered the ground around the simple headstones. Daniel stood quietly for several minutes. Then he removed the letter from his coat pocket. "I think I'll leave this here today." I looked at him. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I've carried it long enough." He carefully folded the letter once more and placed it beneath a small stone at the base of Eli's marker. The wind moved gently through the trees. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. As we walked back toward the buggy, Daniel reached for my hand. "You know," he smiled softly, "I thought marriage meant I had to be the strong one all the time." I smiled back. "And now?" "Now I think strength is trusting someone enough to let them see when you're hurting." His words stayed with me long after that day. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have understood as a young bride. Many people believe love is proven through grand moments, a beautiful wedding, a perfect home, a life without hardship. But those things never tell the whole story. Real love is often much quieter. It's asking, "Are you hurt?" before asking what happened. It's making room for someone else's grief instead of trying to fix it. It's sitting together in silence when words are too small. Years passed.